Another MV7 microphone? Yes, but this is not a USB microphone that I ever imagined existing. This is the MV7i. The I is for interface. That means there's an audio interface built in to the MV7i. Maybe that doesn't sound unique. Every USB microphone has its own USB interface, but in this case, the interface is not just an interface for just this microphone. It's another channel of audio that you can get by plugging into the XLR 1/4-inch combo jack on the bottom of the MV7i. So this, what you're hearing now, is my SM7B, the good old SM7B, and it is plugged into the MV7i, and then the MV7i is running to the computer via USB-C, and you're hearing me through the SM7B. Not only are you hearing me through the SM7B, I have real-time Denoise, which is a digital signal processing option on the MV7 Plus. That is enabled. So my SM7B is getting some compression. It's getting noise removal. In this case, it's getting a gate, something called Smartgate. I'll explore that. That's also new to this microphone. And this SM7B could be a stereo instrument like a keyboard going in via 1/4-inch. It could be a guitar that this will supply instrument level power to the guitar. It can be a condenser microphone that requires 48 volts phantom power. The MV7i supplies that as well. Or it could just be an XLR dynamic mic like the SM7B going into the MV7i. And then coming out of the MV7i, I'm getting separated channels, one for the SM7B, one for the MV7i, that I can then use in post-production to make a perfectly sounding podcast or YouTube video or however you're going to use it. So essentially, the MV7i eliminates an extra audio interface if you want to include more than one microphone. Typically, if you wanted to use more than one microphone via USB, you had to create something like an aggregate device. On Mac, that's built in. On Windows, you can get an app for that, but it's an extra process. It's another piece of software that can go bad, and it's just more setup. Or you have to use the proprietary software that comes with either the microphone. In this case, you have MotivMix. It works great. You can plug in 2 or even more USB microphones and record multi-channel that way. Or if you're using another company's microphones, they may have some of their own software. But in this case, you can have the MV7i, you can plug in another microphone, and you can go direct to your computer or to a mobile device and use any recording software that you want. This just makes you even more compact and mobile, but also it's just really cool because I didn't even think of a USB microphone having another input for another microphone or instrument that you can then just use via USB. So for me, this setup would be an extra microphone. So 2 microphones, 1 USB connection. So that brings up a few questions about this microphone. Does it have enough gain, enough clean gain to power something like the SM7B? I can say yes, but we'll get into it. What is Smartgate and why am I actually very excited to see this as an added feature? I mentioned this is an MV7 Plus in addition to the interface. Have they changed anything about the MV7 Plus? Who would get this? Why would you buy this one? If you have an MV7 Plus or an MV7, would you upgrade to this? Has the MotivMix software changed? Is the processing the same on the microphone? Does it sound the same as the other MV7 microphones? Yes. Has anything changed about the external features of the microphone besides the interface? Yes, the touch panel does something very cool. And of course, we'll hear different microphones plugged into the MV7i so you can get a feeling for how that interface sounds and how it works. Let's jump into some comparisons and the software. All right, we got the MV7i plugged in and we are monitoring audio through the built-in output for latency-free monitoring. Maybe wear headphones to listen to this review so you can hear the differences. And of course, when you're recording, you should always monitor with headphones to help you pick up problems in real time. For instance, if I hit the mute button by accident, you'll know it immediately because you won't hear yourself in your ear. You can fix that. So again, you're hearing the MV7i going into the computer via USB-C. I'm going to go ahead and add the MV7i to the MotivMix software. And when you add the microphone in, you get a choice of audio output mode. And in this case, I'm using multi-track because inputs 1 and 2 are rendered as separate mono channels. So that is our multi-track recording because I have another microphone plugged in to the MV7i. That is the thing about this microphone is we can plug in any other microphone, XLR, could be condenser. This provides phantom power. But in this case, we're using the MV7 Plus via XLR output going into the XLR input of the MV7i. And this MV7 Plus is probably the best option for me to start with because these are basically the same microphone. Except in this case, you do have XLR output. So you can listen to the differences between the microphones as I go back and forth. This is the MV7i, and this is the MV7 Plus, which I previously did a full review on. So check that out because a lot of the settings that are in the MV7 Plus are also, of course, in the MV7i with a few additional features, which I'll focus on for this video. But we're getting our two separate channels, and I will show you Smartgate, which helps prevent bleed from my voice going into the microphone that is not being talked into actively. But in post-production, I typically will always remove the channel that is not active so I can get even cleaner audio. And I'm using Adobe Audition to record this because I can't change settings in real time while also recording inside of MotivMix. But you can also do multi-channel recording inside Shure's MotivMix app. And of course, this is also where we're going to make changes to the settings of the microphone. And in those settings, because of the onboard memory and the digital signal processing, stay in the microphone. Then we could take this microphone, bring it anywhere, and have the same settings without using the app. And what's very cool about that is the other microphone, the other XLR microphone that doesn't have any digital signal processing, also gets those features. I'll demo that more when we plug in the SM7B. So let's run through the settings here. Your first option are global settings, and we have the Smartgate enabled, which I mentioned. And if you look at the waveforms, the separate tracks being recorded in Audition, you can see that one microphone, the MV7i in this case, which I'm talking into, is being recorded at a good level, and you can see a faint signal on track 2, which is the MV7 Plus. So when I speak into the MV7 Plus, you can see the signal is at a good strength for recording the MV7 Plus, and you can see the Smartgate is actively keeping the MV7i at a lower level than if it was off. So let's turn it off. So we take off the Smartgate, and you can see that the bleed from my voice, I'm obviously very close to both microphones. And in a recording setup, you would not be this close to the other person. But you can see now that both waveforms are almost equal in that both of these microphones are picking up almost the same level of audio. And if you put this in your final production, it would not sound very good. Because here's what it sounds like when you have two open microphones with the voice bleeding into both of them. And then here's what it sounds like when I remove one of those tracks, much cleaner. Or when we enable the Smartgate, let's put that back on. The Smartgate is back on, and now you should be hearing a lot less of the other microphone. So this is almost doing that process of removing an open microphone when it's not being used. You're still going to get some bleed, and that's why I like to remove that track in my professional and personal edits. But having Smartgate could make your production a lot faster if it sounds good to you. The monitor mix is really nice because this is where I can control everything that I'm monitoring with my headphones via the headphone output on the MV7i. So I have the level of my microphone, I can adjust that. And then I have the level of the XLR input, so that is the MV7. And if I was using the TRS input, the 1/4 inch, for something like a guitar or a keyboard, I can set the level of that. So you might want your instrument lower than your microphone so you can focus on your vocal or vice versa. And everyone's going to talk at different levels. So the person talking into the second microphone may talk a lot louder or softer, and you can balance that in your headphones. And then you have playback level, which is what you're getting back from the computer. So especially if you're doing a remote podcast, you can control how much you hear coming back and balance that with your own voice. Those are very important options to have, which you'll want once you get into recording. And of course, because it does store the settings on the microphone, in this case, you're going to be locked in. So you either have to go back in the app and adjust those. You can't adjust them on the microphone, which is maybe the only advantage that the original MV7 had. you could control the balance of the inputs and outputs on the microphone itself, which is pretty cool. I also don't think it looked as good, so you get to choose between the two. And then we have reverb. I am not using reverb because this is spoken word. If you're singing, maybe you want to bake in some reverb, but typically anything I'm going to want reverb on is something I'm probably just going to do in post-production. But you do have an option for a few different types of reverb. And then the LED section refers to the touch panel, which is actually a really cool new feature since we are doing two microphones in this case. As I switch over to the MV7 Plus, you can see the live meter is tracking the voice level. And in this case, the MV7 Plus is on the right side of the meter, and the MV7i is being tracked on the left side of the meter. And the mute works that way too. So if I was to touch the right side only, I have now muted the MV7 Plus on the right channel. And then I can unmute that by touching again. And you didn't hear a click, which you can sometimes get with an onboard mute button, whether it's digital or on the device. This is a touch panel, very smooth and quiet. And then of course I can mute, which I won't, my own side, the left side. And so those are split monitoring and split muting. Then you could also do a combined mode instead of split, where it's just all going to be one output indicator. But I really like this split mode. And as you saw in the MV7 Plus tutorial, I went all through modifying the colors. I actually kind of like the default. All right, and then if we go into the mic settings, that is referring to the MV7i itself. You can lock the mute, which is handy because it is very easy to grab this microphone and hit mute by accident. And we have a few presets. So speech will just enable some of these for you, like the real-time denoiser and the popper stopper, as well as put it into auto gain mode. So if you don't really know where to set the gain, even though this does have a sound check feature, which will check the gain settings for you and set it, it's very cool. You can just use auto mode and it'll work very well. In my case, I'm usually going to use manual because I like to have manual control, but you also have singing, which again is just going to put you into an auto mode and just select some of these options for you. And you have instrument, which is very cool. If you plug a 1/4-inch instrument or line level cable, it'll detect that and it'll supply the appropriate amount of power for that device. So currently on my setup here, I have the MV7i at 21 dB of gain. You're hearing this with the compressor off. Go ahead and enable that is light compression. This is medium compression, and this is heavy compression. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that off. I have the limiter enabled. This is the limiter off, and this is the limiter on. I don't really hear a difference in the quality of the audio, so I'm definitely going to go ahead and leave that on for protection. The tone is the EQ shaping of the microphone. I have it set to 50% dark. It's going to sound a little bit more like an SM7B that is flat, but let's dial it all the way here. That is 100% dark. That's 50% dark. This is natural, so kind of flat for this microphone, even though for me, it's definitely brighter than something like an SM7B when it's flat. This is 50% bright, and I can kind of start to hear that. And then this is 100% bright, which you'd have to have a really deep voice to be using this. I don't know why you would use this, but it's here. Every voice is different. Every voice is going to sound different through the microphone, so it has a lot of tone options for you. Again, I'm probably more likely to leave it at natural and then do my post-processing so I can shape the EQ the way that I want. But for this demo, I'm gonna go ahead and leave it at 50% dark, which is the way I have both of these microphones set up. Again, I'm gonna leave the reverbs off. You can put the reverb in your ears so you can hear what that sounds like, and then you can turn on the reverb on the output, on and off. Like I talked about before, I might not wanna bake that in. So if you have a singer and they want some reverb to help them while they're performing, you can turn the reverb on in their headphones and then leave it off on the output so that you can add it later, which is really cool. And the real-time denoiser, which was one of my favorite options of the MV7 Plus. I love the real-time denoiser. It sounds great. I go ahead and just leave it on because something that has noise removal on it, I'm going to want to do that in post-production only. But it's so good here that I go ahead and just leave it on. But if I turn it off, you'll hear there's a fan and this little light here. All right, so pretty low noise floor. Go ahead and listen to that. Definitely need headphones to hear that. I'm going to turn on this heater over here and it'll be dramatically different. All right, so you should be able to hear the noise floor there. This is with the real-time denoiser off. And then when I enable it, the denoise figures out the noise and it is gone. And it might still hear it punch through while I'm talking, but this isn't just a noise gate like the Smartgate where it turns down the input when it doesn't have a signal directly in front of it. This is noise removal. So the noise is being detected and then removed via their proprietary software. And it sounds great. Let's turn it back off. And then turn it back on. And if you're using the MV7 Plus via USB, you get that, but it's getting it now because it is going through the interface of the MV7i and it's getting all the benefits of that digital signal processing, even though it's connected via XLR. That's really cool. And we have popper stopper, popper stopper, popper stopper. Turn it on. Popper stopper, popper stopper. Pretty effective at those low frequency plosives that can go into the microphone. Might as well leave it on and save yourself some post-processing. And then we have a high pass filter, which I leave on off. You could set it to 75 Hertz. That's what this sounds like. I can hear it just a tiny bit, but most voices don't reach below 75 Hertz. So something like a fan, a low level hum could be reduced by having the high pass filter on, and it's not going to affect your voice very much. But then you could go all the way up to 150 Hertz, and that's what this sounds like. And this is definitely going to cut into a lot of voices. So if that's something you need for your voice, you could go ahead and use it, but I'm going to leave it off because again, that's something I'm going to do in post-production. But all of these features are nice to have if you're trying to turn around a production that much faster. And then if we go over to the input, which is in this case, the MV7 Plus, but let's change that. Let's plug in the SM7B. So I've got the SM7B here and it is in flat mode, meaning there's no roll off and there's no high-end boost. And I'm going to need to change some settings here because the MV7 Plus was at 44 dB of gain. It was coming out its XLR, so it needed a little bit more gain than the USB of the MV7i. We're going to bring this all the way up to 55 dB of gain. I'm going to actually go 54 dB of gain. So the interface in the MV7i, can it power an SM7B? It has 60 dB of gain. I'm at 54 dB of gain, and you're seeing an excellent signal, and it sounds great. And of course, again, we're getting digital signal processing on the SM7B because it passes through the MV7i and benefits from all of its processing. Again, the compressor is off, the limiter's on, tone is 50% dark. That was for the MV7 Plus. The SM7B is already dark, so I'm going to go up to natural. And in fact, I might even want to go to bright. Actually, that sounds pretty good at 30% bright. We could tone that down in post-production, but if I go back to natural, I think I'm just going to stick on natural for the SM7B, kind of mimicking exactly what you have on an SM7B with the tone controls. And since mine is set to flat, I'm going to leave it there. And you see here we have XLR. Right there, it sounded like the Smartgate was a little late, so you might hear some fluctuations in your audio after you stop talking and come back onto microphone. That's one of the things I wish you could adjust inside the software, the strength of the gate, the attack, the release, all the settings. So sure, it'd be cool to see an update, if possible, to give manual control over the thresholds and the settings on those gates. Now here's your option for XLR phantom power, which we don't need. But let's plug in a condenser mic just because we can. All right, this is the Shure SM4, and you're not hearing it because it needs phantom power. It's a condenser. So we'll go ahead and engage phantom power. I'm scared because the level's probably too hot. Yes, it is. We can be all the way down to like 30, 32, 31.5. So now you're actually hearing the Shure SM4. We have a condenser mic plugged into the interface of the MV7i, and it is providing 48 volts phantom power so that we can actually hear this microphone. So phantom power, instrument power, just like a regular audio interface that you would use, the MV7i provides that for all the different types of inputs that you're going to put into it. All right, those are all the different settings that you can adjust inside MotivMix software for the MV7i and the other inputs that you're going to interface with. This is a very cool microphone. This is a very neat feature, something that I never even thought about existing. Taking out the extra piece of XLR microphones, the audio interface, and putting it into essentially the USB microphone, because this is a USB microphone with an audio interface that lets you use XLR microphones. At the time of recording, the MV7i is $350. So you're getting a very nice microphone, to me comparable to the sound of an SM7B, plus the audio interface. So it's not just a USB microphone, it's a 2-channel USB microphone. But who's this really for? I think probably the real power in this microphone comes if you're starting a podcast or a YouTube channel and you want to use a mobile device. Because if you have a phone or a tablet with USB-C connection, then you can do a solo or a 2-person microphone setup and just your phone, and that's all you need. And the Motiv software also has a video app, so you could do a video recording with your 2 inputs and your mobile device, and that's all you would need. And maybe the biggest negative is the handling noise, which is still an issue. This microphone, if I'm in a live stream or a podcast, I'm probably going to want to move it at some point. I do all the time with the SM7B, and you'll see people handle this microphone often. They'll move it around and you won't hear anything because it has that internal shock mount and it's highly effective. However, all these MV7 models are very sensitive to handling noise. If you're anywhere near the microphone or tapping on the desk even, and it goes through the microphone arm, which is a good reason to separate the arm from the desk, maybe just a boom arm over a desk. But if you're going to handle this, you're going to have to be extremely cautious because you'll get the handling noise. If you have the MV7 Plus already, the microphone alone would not be the reason to upgrade. You'd want to have a use for that audio interface. Again, if you're a musician, this is a cool option because it eliminates that extra audio interface piece. But again, it feels like a very specific need. So if it is something that you are setting up to do and you want 2 microphones, it's specifically 2 people, right? You can't put in 3 or 4 people, but generally a 2-person setup or a setup with a musical instrument and you want to sing, those very specific setups would make this microphone worth it. And the key is that the audio interface sounds as good as the other audio interfaces that I've used on this channel, which really boils down to, can it cleanly power an SM7B? And it's doing that. So it passes. All right, that's the MV7i. I think this is really cool, mostly because I was totally surprised by it. Had to wrap my head around it at first. If you still have questions, you probably do, ask those in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as possible, and I'll see you next time.